I am Dr. Jagtej Kaur Garewal, Assistant Professor, Department of Art History and Visual Arts, Punjab University, Chandigarh. Today we shall be talking about Mughal painting during the reign of Akbar. One of the greatest roles played by the Mughal emperors was as patrons of art, and emerging from this is one of the finest achievements of their rule, Mughal miniature painting. Here, the beginning of painting under the Mughals is discussed, tracing the arrival of Persian masters in the court of Humayun to the unprecedented patronage and consequent evolution in the art under Akbar. The journey to the emergence of a distinct Mughal style of painting is studied. To understand the great florescence of the art of painting under the Mughals, it is essential to have an overview of the events that were significant in the narrative of Mughal painting and also of the interests of the emperors, as the personality of the patron is an important factor in the direction that Mughal painting takes. So we'll begin initially with Babur. The foundation of the Mughal Empire in India was laid by Babur, who traced his ancestry from the dynasty of Timur. Babur marched on Delhi and defeated the Muslim ruler of the Delhi Sultanate, Ibrahim Lodi, in 1526. The man he was is revealed in his autobiography, originally in Turkey and later translated into Persian during the reign of Akbar, the Babarnama. One of the known figures in world history, his conquest and rule prove him to be a great warrior and able statesman, and the Babarnama in addition reveals him as an instinctive poet, writer and naturalist. Percy Brown puts it succinctly that Babur was a born artist, as is shown on every page of his own memoirs, and that he had an artist's eye that enabled him to write so feelingly of beauty. The sense of an aesthete he possessed was one of the inheritances of his descendants. After Babur's death in 1530, Humayun became the emperor, possessed of similar scholarly attributes, but lacking the political astuteness of his father. He suffered a series of military setbacks. Defeated by the Afghan Sher Shah in 1540, Humayun had to flee India and was in exile in Iran at the court of Shah Tahmasp. It was here, while in exile, that Humayun tried to persuade some Iranian painters working for the Shah to join him. That also coincided with the Shah turning away from the art in face of his increasing religious orthodoxy. Stuart Cary Welch states that Humayun was permitted and in fact even encouraged to hire and take with him Safavid artists. Though S.P. Marma, in painting the Mughal experience, referring to Jauhar's Tezkire al-Waqiyat, also infers that Humayun might have already had an atelier even during his exile at Amarkot. In 1545, Humayun succeeded in taking Kandahar and Kabul, and it was at his court in Kabul that the first Iranian masters arrived in 1550 according to Milo Cleveland Beach and 1552 according to what Susan Straunch says. These were Mir Sayyid Ali and Abdus Samad, who were to play a very significant role in the imperial atelier that grew and flourished following Humayun recapturing Hindustan in 1555. Other Persian masters who are said to have joined the atelier are Mir Musawwar and Dust Muhammad. Humayun's interest in the fine arts is revealed by a passage in Abul Fazl's Akbarnama, in which Fazl records that the emperor divided his subjects into 3 classes, of which one was of those that were the delight of the world, the Ahle Murad, that included architects, painters, musicians and singers. In fact, a noting in the Tarikh-e-Khandan-e-Taimuriya, which is now in the Khuda Bakhsh Library in Patna, refers to Humayun taking lessons from the 2 Persian masters, Mir Sayyid Ali and Abdus Samad, who had joined him at Kabul. Clearly underlining the emperor's interest in the art, accounts also refer to more artists joining Humayun's atelier, namely with the number eventually going up to 6. Some of the works that have been identified as having been painted for Humayun are in a Safavid style. such as an illustration to the Shahnama dated around circa 1550-55 attributed to Mir Sayyid Ali. The Persian character of the painting being done at the court is also seen in a large work on cotton cloth that depicts princes of the house of Temur, dated to about circa 1545-50 by Abdus Samad, that includes early portraits of Babur, Humayun and Akbar. But scholars also note that the work of the Persian masters had also begun to respond to the new stimuli. A painting that John Saylor, based on two inscriptions, identifies as a self-portrait by Mir Sayyid Ali, marks a change from his paintings done in Tabriz and even Kabul, as this work is dated to circa 1555-56, when Humayun had recaptured Delhi. In this image, the volume of the figure and the spatial depth suggested mark its difference from Persian painting. These characteristics refer to the execution style of the Hamzanama and exemplify the style of painting on the eve of Akbar's accession. Now we move on to the patronage of painting under Akbar. After Humayun's sudden death in 1556, the 13-year-old Akbar was enthroned, and his next few years were taken up in expanding and consolidating his empire. A brilliant statesman, administrator and a military genius, Akbar from his youth showed interest in painting, and he too is said to have taken lessons in painting from Abdus Samad while in Kabul. So this is one image showing that particular aspect. Now going on to the imperial atelier. Akbar inherited skilled craftsmen, artists and architects from his father Humayun. Many others arrived from Iran and Central Asia and from parts of the subcontinent to join the imperial ateliers. The legacy of painting bequeathed by his father found a deeply interested patron in him to grow and flower. The resources that Akbar made available for the imperial atelier, along with the increasing political stability, led to artistic efflorescence during his time. There was great improvement in the materials available for painting and also in the technical aspects of the art, from draftsmanship to color application. This is also the period that the anonymity that had cloaked Indian artists falls away. Abul Fazl's account refers to the imperial atelier having more than 100 painters by the 1580s who had reached the status of a master and gained fame. Along with the names of the leading masters of the workshop, Mir Sayyid Ali, Basavan, Madhu, Miskin, Abdus Samad, there is mention of calligraphers, illuminators, gilders and bookbinders. Not only does Abul Fazl mention names, but there are inscriptions on words identifying the artists, their signatures appended on some, notes added when the manuscripts were added to the imperial library that mention the artists. The emperor's engagement with the art of painting can also be gauged from accounts that mention that he examined the works every week and awarded those painters who excelled by giving rewards and increasing their salary. In fact, there was a moving atelier in which artists accompanied the emperor, and there was also division of labor, so that a painting became the work of 2 to 3 painters who all contributed their specific expertise and talent to its making. For example, Basavan was known for psychological portraiture. Akbar, in fact, marshalled a subtle philosophical argument in defense of painting and against theological injunctions, as Abul Fazl records. Bigoted followers of the letter of the law are hostile to the art of painting, but their eyes now see the truth. One day, at a private party of friends, His Majesty, who had conferred on several the pleasure of drawing near him, remarked, "There are many that hate painting, but such men I dislike." It appears to me as if a painter has quite a peculiar means of recognizing God. For a painter, in sketching anything that has life and devising its limbs one after the other, must come to feel that he cannot bestow individuality upon his work and is thus forced to think of God, the giver of life, and will thus increase in knowledge. So we now discuss some sources of style of painting. The presence of artists from varied artistic traditions such as Iran and Central Asia, and Indian artists from various places such as Gwalior, Kashmir, Gujarat and Lahore, among others, ensured that the atelier and its productions were enriched with the best from different sources, the synthesis of which led to what we now know as Mughal painting. Thus, the influences that are visible in early Mughal painting are A. Persian painting, through which there is also a filtering in of the influence of Chinese painting, the impact of Chinese painting in Persian art being traced to the 13th and to the 14th century, Persian textiles and porcelain first, such as in the softer, sinuous line and subdued colouring, the impact of the horizontal format of the former appearing as the abrupt cutting off of objects by the margins, some depiction of space through the use of the bird's eye view and certain motifs such as convoluted clouds, dragons. B. Indian and Indo-Islamic painting, the pre-Mughal period painting, Lord Chanda, Charpanchashika and Sultanate group of paintings, and through these influences, earlier traditions of Indian painting such as Western Indian miniature painting, and C. European painting. The first, that is the influence of Persian painting, can be attributed to the Persian masters who had joined the atelier in Kabul and then came to India along with other artists from Iran and Central Asia following over time. They brought with them knowledge of the latest Iranian techniques and styles to the Mughal court. Persian painting is known as the art of line for its refined and calligraphic quality along with fine execution and finished surfaces, and the influence is seen in early Mughal painting. The other elements that derive from Persian influence are the vertical format, the high viewpoint with space not receding into the distance but rising up, thus creating a lack of recession. Certain specific motifs such as the Chinese cloud, which is a scroll-like curvilinear cloud, typical gestures such as the forefinger pressed against the lips to indicate wonder or awe. What Susan Straunch terms the logical result of the direction of Mir Sayyid Ali and Abdus Samad. The second, that is the influence of Indian painting, can be seen in the broad areas of saturated colour and a warm colour palette reminiscent of the Indian painting traditions and certain conventions drawn from Indian painting. For example, a female figure in a painting from the Hamzanama. The third, that is European painting, is an influence that was largely dormant, but to it is credited the naturalism in Mughal painting. Pratapaditya Pal points out that in some pictures of the 1580s and in some works by Besavan, the three-dimensionality of architecture, individual figures more naturalistically modelled, landscape backgrounds often taken directly from European work are some features that exhibit the influence of European examples. In course of time, what one witnesses is the emergence of a style that is neither one nor the other, but takes from all to create a style never seen in India or Iran, the Mughal style of painting. The process of synthesis and emergence of a style that was distinct in itself is visible when one studies the production of the imperial atelier chronologically. One of the first major productions of the imperial atelier was the making of the Hamzanama, and in its paintings, the influences that impact painting in the early years are clearly visible. In these works, one can identify features derived from Persian or Indian traditions. But by the 1580s, the process of synthesis and emergence of the Mughal style can be seen, as exemplified by paintings of the Akbar manuscript in the Victoria and Albert Museum, London. Some elements of Mughal painting that distinguish it from the art of painting as it had been in India are, in subject matter and its intention, Mughal painting reflects the mind of the emperor. This is clearly discernible as we move from painting during the reign of Akbar to that of Jahangir and then Shah Jahan. The reigning emperor's interests determine the subject matter as also the stylistic evolution of the art form. It is an art that is factual, based on the materialistic and subjective. Painting is now non-symbolic, and the concern is with the here and now, with actual events as especially revealed through productions such as the Akbarnama, the chronicle of Akbar's reign till the late 16th century. And of course, the artists are no longer anonymous. Painting under Akbar, and in fact under the Mughals, can be placed in three categories. One being wall paintings, which were done on the walls of palaces and forts, of which the ones done during the time of Akbar are no longer extant, but are referred to in literature of the period. Then the second, manuscript painting, a genre which was the most significant during the reign of Akbar. In fact, these were made in such large numbers and on varied subjects that these two can be further categorized according to their themes. And these are, first, Persian literary works such as the Hamzanama, Shahnama, Tutinama and others. The second, histories of the past and the present. The Mughals and Akbar in particular had a great sense of history, as is evident from the productions of his atelier. The Temurnama, also known as the Tarikh-e-Khandane-Temuriya, the Babarnama, Akbarnama, Chingiznama. Then the third, manuscripts of Hindu subject matter that were translated and illustrated, such as the Razmanama, the Book of the Great War, a Persian translation of the Mahabharata. Ramayana, the Harivamsa. Then the third category are the loose leaf paintings, that is, individual works that are not part of any manuscript, which includes portraits, Christian themes, depiction of flora and fauna, In fact, Akbar's interest in history is evidenced by the fact that he ordered an album to be prepared with portraits of his nobles and courtiers. Abul Fazl goes on to say that these were ordered so that those who were deceased would be remembered and the living might gain a sense of immortality. Talking of the emerging character of Mughal painting under Akbar, Pratapadidyapal also states that Akbar's sense of history, his own destiny, and the importance of the dynasty's achievements contributed a great deal to the kind of narrative accuracy and observed naturalism that distinguish Mughal painting from both the Persianate and the earlier Indian traditions. Akbar was the first Indian ruler to introduce realistic portrait in Indian art, quotes close. A measure of this interest in realism is evidenced by the fact that Akbar is said to have sat for his portrait by his atelier. As stated earlier, in Mughal painting, the personality of the patron finds a reflection in the work produced. Thus, some of the features of Akbari period painting, such as the dynamism in movement, action being directed by the emperor, it can be termed a gestural painting around whom it revolves, even though he's almost never in the center of the painting, all reflect the drive and dynamism of Akbar. Now we look at the paintings or discuss some of the paintings which we find here. Now we'll discuss the different kinds of paintings found during this period. First, illustrated manuscripts. Milo Cleveland Beach identifies a Tutinama manuscript as the earliest manuscript that can be attributed to the reign of Akbar. The Tutinama is an anthology of short stories ostensibly told by a parrot to its mistress on 52 successive nights, and by capturing her interest, it prevents her from seeking romance elsewhere in the absence of a husband. In his words, this manuscript lacks stylistic unity and shows the hand of artists drawn from a variety of local Indian styles. The Lord Chanda Chaur Panchashika style, Sultanate painting, trying to adjust to other stylistic influences such as Persian painting, which he attributes to visual evidence that the two Persian masters were involved in the making of the Tutinama. The major production we'll discuss now is the Hamzanama manuscript. The most significant in terms of understanding the evolution of Mughal painting and for being the first major production of the imperial atelier is the Hamzanama manuscript, also known as the Qissa-e-Amir Hamza. That it was celebrated in its time is evident from a number of contemporary literary references to the project of the Hamzanama. For example, Mir Alaul-Dawla Qazvini, in his commentary on poetry and a compendium of biographies of poets, mentions this work. Muhammad Arif Kandhari in a text written, Muhammad Arif Kandhari in a text known as Tarikh-e-Akbari or Tarikh-e-Kandhari mentions it, and so does Abul Fazl in the Akbarnama, and Badauni in his unofficial and at times critical chronicle of Akbar's reign. Scholars generally agree that the project that involved the making of around 1400 folios took about 15 years till completion. Based on the reading of different sources, art historians have variously assessed the dating of the manuscript. Karl Khandalwala, basing it on Badauni's reference to the work being completed in 1582, dates the commencement of the Hamzanama to 1567. Pramod Chandra, again based on literary evidence, proposes the dates of 1562 to 1577. John Saylor, who bases his assessment on a number read as a date on a folio, proposes its commencement to 1557-58 and completion to 1569-70. The Hamzanama, that is the story of Hamza, is one of the oldest and popular romances of the Persian world that had been largely within the oral tradition, and over centuries it became known in many different versions and languages such as Arabic, Urdu, Turkish. It has the historical figure of Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, the paternal uncle of Prophet Muhammad at its core, who after first resisting later converted to Islam in 615 and died at the Battle of Uhud in 625. He came to be commemorated as a hero and martyr, but some of the stories are inspired by another figure, Hamza ibn Abdullah, who lived in the 8th, 9th century, and over centuries, other fantastical tales became part of the narrative. As John Saylor puts it, the Hamza romance, therefore, is neither a biography of a single historical individual nor an account of the spread of Islam, but a collection of wildly entertaining stories, something in the order of the 1001 Nights or the lore of Robin Hood. The Hamzanama is above all a tale of heroes. It is a series of action-packed stories with romances, battles, murders and kidnappings enacted by a wide cast of characters that include not just heroes and beautiful women, but also giants, spies, magicians and dragons. Apart from the visionary patronage of Akbar, it is the oral recitation tradition that it belonged to that seems to have influenced the size and format of the manuscript. It originally, as stated, comprised of 1400 folios. Some say placed in 14 volumes and others state in 12 volumes, of which about 1/10 folios are extant. More than 2 feet high, with the illustration on one side and the text on the other, thus it lent itself to a public recitation by a storyteller, while the illustrations invited a closer perusal. The recto is the painting on plain weave cotton fabric, which is backed by paper, then another layer of fabric, while the verso is paper that has text written on it in Nastaliq script, usually in 19 lines. Mir Sayyid Ali supervised the project initially, and on his proceeding on Hajj, it was assigned to Abd Samad. Even as early Mughal painting under Humayun, as evidenced by the few works commissioned by him, are described as essentially akin to contemporary Safavid works. It is in the Hamzanama paintings that the evolution of Mughal painting is visible. From a style exhibiting distinct Persian and Indian stylistic norms in the early phase, this begins to change. By the middle of the project, till towards the final stage, the birth of a synthetist style is visible. On the assumption that the project was carried out regularly, Heinrich Gluck, as early as 1925, established the position of the illustrations in the series, thus plotting a development in the style. In the early pages, which are still within the Persian idiom, the compositions have greater symmetry and movement is restrained. As the works are on a larger scale, they do suffer from a certain coarseness in drawing, but in later works, that is countered with an elaboration of patterns in drapery, architecture, etc. As the project progressed and the various influences began to enmesh together, the changes that were effected are: the compositions acquire a certain dynamism, with movement which at times is so vigorous that it is hardly contained by the margins that appear to cut off action of figures at the edge, making the scene look a section of a larger painting. The convention of aerial perspective continues to be used, but the device of cutting off figures in the foreground so that just the head and shoulders are visible is employed. This allows the artist to present a clear and complete picture, with the aerial view giving the bird's eye view of the scene into the distance, and yet the figures are shown frontally, up close and in detail. Some exemplars of this evolution in the style of painting are visible in the works that we shall discuss. The first is titled Hamza Fights 3 Days. This is identified as a work from one of the early volumes of the manuscript. In this too, like in most extant examples, the text on the reverse has been stripped. The folio also shows a strongly Persianate style. Saylor identifies elements that underline this, such as the flatter depiction of the 3 demons, which is described as large, 2-dimensional shapes embedded in a carefully constructed compositional pattern, and the pointed small rocks in the painting in unnatural shapes that are found frequently in Safavid painting and almost never in early Mughal painting. Even the plain tree on the side that is seen in the paintings attributed to Mir Sayyid Ali and Abd Samad indicates that the work is by an artist trained in the Safavid style. Another early work showing similar Persianate style is a painting of a battle scene in which the densely packed composition has soldiers on camels and horses fighting each other. Despite this, it seems that the action is posed as it lacks vigor and dynamism, and the figures, rather than receding in depth, rise up as they move backwards. The calligraphic line and fine details link it to Persian painting. The next painting is entitled Landhor is abducted in his sleep by a Dev. The story is of Landhor, the prince from Ceylon, who was defeated by Hamza in a 17 days long wrestling match. Eventually Landhor went on to convert to Islam. Looking at the image, the different influences that impacted painting at the Mughal court at that time are clearly visible. The pink color of the ground with tufts of grass, the stylized schematic foliage with gold-edged leaves are derived from the Persian tradition. The demon with his large eyes and scaly furry body seems to indicate the influence of Chinese art filtered through Persian painting. The figure of Landhor, with his features, dark complexion and the use of orange, blue and green colors, refers to the influence of pre-Mughal painting. Though the small rocks mark the emergence of a distinctive characteristic of Mughal painting, but they too can be traced back to Persian influence. The next work, entitled Umar Slays a Dragon with Naphtha, is attributed by John Saylor to Daswant and Tara. The work is a fine example of the emergence of the Mughal style, seen in the rich, saturated colors, the convincing depiction of a crowd, of distance and volume, as also the reading of the picture in stages, here from the foreground to the background. In this painting, the reference to Chinese influence in Persian art and then to Mughal painting can be discerned in the dragon in the work. The artist dramatizes the depiction, placing Umar and the dragon in a wide expanse of the composition and against the pitted, blackened habitat of the dragon. Against this, the white spotted dragon with its wings and snarling open mouth stands out sharply, especially as the golden flames from its snout, crest and forelegs contrast with the dark ground. The next work, Mihir Dukht shoots a bow at the ring, is the story of the maiden who sets tough challenges to throw her suitors off. Here she performs a tough task of shooting an arrow through a ring held in the beak of a golden bird atop a minaret. In this painting, elements drawn from a number of sources enrich the pictorial vocabulary. According to Barrett and Gray, the plants in the garden and the exotic foliage recall Deccani paintings, whereas the architecture with its bracketed capital is reminiscent of the architecture at the Gwalior fort, and the minaret is in a style prevalent in Ahmedabad. Mihir Dukht's companions in their transparent ornis and chakdar jamas recall the Lord Chanda and Chaurapanchi Shika style, and one girl seems to have stepped in from wall paintings from South India. Here some of the characteristics identified with Mughal painting can be seen: an effortless combination of the aerial view with the figures in a frontal view, figures in the foreground being cut off by a wall or a gateway, action divided with the help of elements of the painting such as walls, etc. The next work, A Hero Kills a Demoness, is attributed to Keshav Das. The subject of the painting remains elusive. The narrative is clearly of a hero raising his sword to deal a fatal blow to the demoness. The entire action takes place in the foreground with the background closed off. The entire action takes place in the foreground with the background closed off with curvilinear rock formations. But what is of interest is the depiction of clouds in the sky. These curling, flame-like clouds have their antecedents in Chinese painting that had taken root in Islamic art by the 14th, 15th centuries and now appear in Mughal miniatures. Zumrud Shah falls into a pit and is beaten by suspicious gardeners, again attributed to Keshav Das. Here Zumrud Shah, the king from the east, an adversary of Hamza, suffers the ignominy of a beating by ordinary gardeners who suspect him of stealing. The work is a blend of Persian art and native elements, the latter seen in the extended sense of space that is conveyed and by the agitated action that is depicted. This tendency towards dramatization is unlike the Persians. The size of the giant Shah is alluded to by making just his head and shoulders visible in the pit that has been dug up by the gardeners to catch the culprit. As they beat him with sticks, welts and wounds are seen as he protests his innocence. The actual thieves, the family of bears, is depicted in the left foreground, screened from the gardeners by the rocks and the tree. Beyond the zigzag wall is the reason for all this, the orchard with its grape vines, date palm trees and other vegetation. The depiction of the vegetation also points to Persian antecedents in the delicately flowering trees, as also Indian influence in the realistically rendered palm and what appear to be plantain trees. This work reveals certain features that define the Mughal style of painting, such as the compositional device of breaking up the picture space into a number of small spaces through the use of walls, cliffs or rocky outcrops, tents and canopies that lead the eye on a zigzag path around the image from the lower edge to the upper and help to create the illusion of receding depth. At times, 8 to 10 such receptacles or spaces are created in a work. The fact that the style of the Hamzanama draws upon diverse art traditions is revealed on a closer examination of paintings. In these folios appear the Indian and the Iranian convention of depicting water, the former seen in the basket weave pattern in some works. Susan Strange also refers to the wide range of conventions in the depiction of the human face that draws upon Persian painting, Jain miniature painting and also paintings of Lepakshi. Similarly, the depiction of animals shown with realism and in their characteristic behavior again draws upon Indian sources. This discussion of the Hamzanama illustrations encapsulates the development of painting under the Mughals that, while drawing upon various sources, sets the stage for a new style that is like none before. Now we come to one of the major productions, the Akbarnama. Akbar's interest in contemporary history and art comes together in the writing and illustrating of the Akbarnama. The task of writing the history of his reign was given by Akbar to his friend and polymath Abul Fazl in 1589. By 1596, Abul Fazl had prepared the fifth and final version of the Akbarnama that runs into 3 volumes. He drew upon the official court records of the Record Office, as also accounts by contemporary figures such as Bayezid Bayat, Johar, Gulbadan Begum, Arif Kandhari and also the Babarnama. A number of illustrated copies of the Akbarnama exist, of which the foremost is that in the collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum, London, that contains 116 illustrations from volumes 2 and 3 and with a holograph inscription that identifies it as having once belonged to Jahangir and is presumed to have been Akbar's own copy, dated to about circa 1590-95. Though John Saylor dates it to circa 1586-87, basing this on a date he identified on a folio, and also as, in his opinion, these paintings were initially made for another history of Akbar's rule, but later incorporated with Abul Fazl's Akbarnama. Another copy is divided between the British Library, which has 39 illustrations of Volume 1, and the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin, which has 66 illustrations from Volumes 2 and 3. And on the basis of the style of the paintings is dated from 1603 to 1605. The third, that in the matter of style is akin to the first Akbarnama, is part of a private collection of about 13 illustrations and is reasoned to be a copy of Hamida Banu Begum, Akbar's mother, and is dated to circa 1595 to 1600. Susan Straunch, quoting Abul Fazl's concluding remarks to his work, states that the Akbarnama, as it chronicles the reign of Akbar, is also presented as a lesson in political science and moral treatise. The most well-known of the copies is the one at the Victoria and Albert Museum, not just for its imperial connection, but more importantly, as it encapsulates within its folios the developed Mughal style of painting. In the Akbarnama paintings, the treatment of space combines the bird's eye view of the landscape with the figures depicted frontally. The composition is in terms of geometrical forms, and in a number of paintings, there is a strong diagonal axis that increases manifold the dynamism of the scene. Siege guns at Ranthambore being one example. The line work is fine and the colors are brilliant, though saturated, and highlights are used to model form. In the paintings, very rarely is Akbar shown in the center of the composition, though the action revolves around him. The horizon is usually placed high and arbitrarily cuts off the landscape or architectural elements at the upper margin. The compositions have a great many figures and a lot of realistic details, and yet the overall action is balanced and controlled. We shall be looking at the folios mainly from the Victoria and Albert collection. In these works, a large number of paintings are unbroken by any text, and where included, it is generally short. Maximum space is given over to the paintings, and here there are a number of double-page miniatures that occupy the full opening of the manuscript. Here we start to see a break from the Persian practice towards the separation of image and text. The paintings of the Akbarnama provide us with a rich and descriptive visual account of the important and some less significant events from the reign of Akbar. On the basis of the images available in the Victoria and Albert Akbarnama, Susan Straunch places them under the following categories. A. The royal hunt. Hunts were a favourite royal pastime and were also important to keep an army alert and fighting fit at all times, and in addition, a shrewd strategy to move the royal army freely to keep an eye on any suspected seditious intent or activity. One of the finest depictions is said to be the double-page composition designed by Miskin that record the Kamargah, a hunt in the Timurid style that took place at Lahore in 1567. In the right folio, Akbar appears hunting alone, and in the left folio, he is accompanied by another hunter. The movement and the swiftness of the animals and the hunters is well depicted. The second category she titles the depiction of treachery. The disloyalty of Maham Anaga's younger son, Adam Khan, and his downfall are vividly captured. The third are titled Scenes of Prestige, that include scenes of governors of provinces paying homage and the annual nazar to Akbar, and reception of ambassadors in court such as from the court of Shah Tamas. Such depictions underline the power and prestige of Akbar, not just in the subcontinent, but also in the outside world. The fourth category of paintings are titled Battles. These highlight the building of the empire by Akbar and the numerous campaigns he led to success. Particularly his victories over the Rajputs in Rajasthan find place in these, such as the siege of Chittor, and Ranthambore. These battles had strategic and symbolic importance for Akbar, as after these he was able to subdue the Rajputs and turn his attention to other campaigns such as in Gujarat, These also secured the routes to Gujarat and Deccan. Another category she entitles The Life of the King. According to Susan Strange, in these accounts, the tone is more reflective and the incidents depicted highlight the special qualities of Akbar, and even prosaic characteristics of the emperor's personality are given multiple layers of meaning. The representations range from Akbar in a mystical trance, to celebrations on the birth of Salim, to Akbar on pilgrimage to Ajmer, to Akbar supervising the construction of the Agra fort, among many others. The incidents reveal various facets, from his spiritual leanings to his dynamism and fearlessness to his joy at the birth of his sons, and the chronology of all incidents is clearly recorded. For example, we see here Akbar riding the elephant Hawai, pursuing another elephant across a collapsing bridge of boats, an incident which took place in 1561. This work is attributed to Basavan. Akbar from a young age had revelled in the sport of riding elephants and mast and controlling them, a dangerous sport that he showed skill and bravery in. In this particular incident, he managed to ride and control a particularly ferocious elephant, Hawai, and actually make it fight another elephant. The painting shows the scene where the other elephant fled, with Akbar chasing him on Hawai over a bridge of boats on the river Yamuna. And as the beasts thunder over the bridge, which collapses behind them, the people scramble out of the way and jump into the water to save themselves. The artist brings in a great degree of realistic detail in the image, conveying the movement and chaos well, with boats coming in to save those in the water. The sharp diagonal axis of the composition helps convey a sharper dynamism. The other side of the double-page illustration shows the worried onlookers praying for the life and safety of the emperor, with the Prime Minister Ataga Khan, who had remonstrated with Akbar to no avail. The discussed works are just a small part of the very prolific output of the imperial atelier under Akbar. Even as during this period, the Mughal style of painting emerged and evolved into a refined art form, it was later under Akbar's son Jahangir that its finest efflorescence is seen.